Hi, welcome. On this video, this is part four of my response breakdown by way of conversation between Bill Church and Ivan Balbanov. And here again, I've jumped this 4 hour conversation forward because it's going to be impossible for me to respond to everything here. But again, I moved it forward here about an hour in as I kind of scan some of the conversation here, coming to a point of again talking about response, and I'm going to unpack some of this, getting those who again who are looking at trainers, how they paint a picture of change, how they attempt to bring together certain responses so that those responses can be reliable, okay, consistent. And but again, the question is how do you get there? What's the relational glue, as I call it, that holds it all together? And here's the thing I'd encourage you to check out. Again, when I talk about a process, going through a sequence, and this is where if you go watch my service dog training series videos, you'll see the whole thing, the whole 4 months, okay, from start to finish, how I bring it all together. But the initial, okay, part of the process, the point of engagement, is the whole thing about relationship change. Okay, this is where I talk about focus, okay, generating the right focus so that when you start to, okay, get in this whole thing about, response, getting a dog to do a certain thing on command, that it's going to be dependable, consistent, trustworthy, that that no matter where you're at, say in a very challenging, distracting environment, without using treats, okay, to motivate that response, that the dog is going to perform as needed, when needed, and again, specific to you being perceived the right way in the relationship. Understand it's about, at the social level. It's about how the dog perceives you in and through the relationship. Dogs is pack animals. Okay, how do you actually get to that point of, of a reliable response? And this is where again I get in this whole thing about, okay, the process itself at the beginning, okay, not just starting to engage that way. Okay, this is where you get these trainers who, and they completely miss this whole thing. They jump right over it. They start to just try to get responses happening using treats, using certain motivating agents. You don't want to do that way. Understand that you want to make sure you generate the right focus first in the relationship through again a intentional interaction based approach. Okay, that's the primary focus. That will still be there somewhat, even throughout the whole thing at a certain level, but because there is a point where I'm going to start to engage with getting a dog to respond. Once I get to a certain level where that dog's focus has shifted at a pretty good level, then I'm going to start to engage the dog with getting the dog to use responses. Even using treats at a certain point may not be a bad thing at all. So understand when people look at my videos, they always look at things. See, this is the problem. When you look at things through a certain specific lens, okay, where the roadmap is laid out a certain way, it almost like people can't even apply critical thinking to look at it and say, okay, hold on a second. He's doing that. He is doing that over here. Okay, this is what I'm talking about. When people watch my videos, right? You're seeing, because here's the thing about my videos. You go watch my videos, you're seeing me dealing with dogs for the most part, especially on my board and trains, that have hit the tipping point. Okay, that I'm engaging in that part of the process where it's interaction based, where I'm changing perceptions because the dog has I'm dealing with aggressive dogs. So what I'm doing is I'm changing out the cornerstone of the relationship that way. Okay, but it's interaction based. Okay, this whole thing about responses. This is where trainers are all mixed up in this stuff, and because they see a relationship problem the way that they shouldn't be seeing it as a learning based exercise with engaging at a response. And so they look at the sit down, come and stay as some sort of a gauge or a measure to tell them that the relationship's improving based on those responses, and that's absolutely ridiculous. That's not what you should be looking at all, or motivating a dog to be doing, and then basing that on how you're going to assess change. See, this is the problem in the dog training world. It's like totally upside down now. So when you look at my videos, you'll see the response side of things happening once the relationship has changed the right way in terms of how you're perceived, because that's where the focus comes from. You're being perceived. That's why trainers will use treats to generate focus, right? It's so ridiculous. Generate focus, and just there's no depth, no context, no anything. Just saying, well, I use treats the dog. Oh, the dog's looking at me. Well, how's the dog? How are you being perceived? Think of it the same way as a child going to a certain parent. Especially once a relationship problem is already underway, your parenting style is already, say, permissive. The child's going to a certain parent because they get what they want. But in the dog training world, how they're packaging that up is the same thing, saying, "Oh, I'm, say for a parent, the child's coming to me, so just by default, just on that basis alone, I have a good relationship, and and it's proper, it's right." Perception of the child, or I'm being seen. I mean, that's so ridiculous. So because anyone look at it and say, well, then why is the other parent being ignored at the same time, right? Based on different parenting style. See, that's the problem here. There's no depth. There's no context. There's no depth at all. And then you wonder why the dog training world is all sideways. And then you have these trainers who are so entrenched in the stuff, they can't even apply critical thinking to see any other, put things in the right context or any other way, because they've already, it's like they're turned over to the stuff. That's the only way I could describe. They're actually turned over to it. It's like a type of identity crisis. They can't even get out of it now. So it's so bad. I mean, this is why, again, you go watch my service dog training videos, you'll see how a process is established. It's like going through a sequence, and it makes sense. Okay, it makes sense, but it's like people can't even. It's almost like these trainers would watch my whole um, 4 month service dog training process, but they wouldn't even watch the whole thing. Like they watch. This is how bad it is. To go in and watch the first video of me, like the interaction part of it, and say this ain't service dog training, and they wouldn't watch anything else. It's like they just lay a judgment on like just a small part of it, and then they themselves will have dogs that are a mess, and they keep selling it. So it's just so bad. The dog training, the dog training world is so bad that you can't. Here's my encouragement: if you're gonna like be able to reconcile what a process is and what I'm doing, all that, you better do it before you identify as a certain type of trainer. Okay, that would be my cautionary tale here, because the majority of trainers out there, it's like too late or something. They can't do it, and they're in the mass. So, but anyway, let's play something. So, understand. So you hear them talking about this whole thing about responses, but pay attention to that word behavior is brought in where it doesn't belong. Okay, this is the Brian, but they're talking about this whole thing about reinforcing a behavior. No, these are just responses. And then if the jumping in point, I talk about the whole interaction part of it to establish the right focus, right, bring those core ingredients in. If that's not happening at the beginning, because there's your foundation. If the foundation isn't right, and you start to jump into this whole thing with trying to get responses happen a certain way, here's the problem: they're never going to hold together properly. Okay, you're being this is why you see these service dogs in distracting areas, and they can't perform certain tasks. And here's the problem: like, you really think about what I'm saying here. Certain tasks require greater focus. Certain tasks require greater focus. So with those specific tasks, say it could be picking up an object off the floor. These dogs will never do it out in the public, right? There'll be like this whole thing with attached to the person. This is the problem with people who are suffering certain, emotional issues going on, PTSD and stuff. These dogs will be attached, but even the wrong way in that. Okay, it'll be the wrong type of attachment. The dogs are in a possessive, controlling state, and so even that isn't right. So it's a mess all the way around. But again, dogs that perform certain tasks require greater focus, and you'll see it all fall to pieces in that. So let's play some of this here conversation at this point.
A myth. It's very misleading, actually. That's kind of my argument on that one.
We have a comment. Self-discovered behaviors aren't stronger than a taught behavior. If you stop.
So right here, this question asks self-discovered behavior. See, this is where the word is misapplied. You want to think of it just all as responses. Okay. I mean, it's so superficial. The whole dog training world is superficial. So even this whole roadmap with describing certain reactions or even responses from dogs, they're labeled certain ways that are misapplied. Okay. Then a taught aren't stronger than self-discovery aren't stronger than a taught behavior. Well, this is where it goes back to that same thing I'm talking about. You talk about self-discovered, right? What does that mean, right? But think about the current state of the relationship. Okay, if you don't have the right foundation to make that transition in terms of relationship change to begin with the right way, if you talk about self-discovered behaviors, or really their responses, how a dog is expressing, okay, through the relationship that way, it could be control being expressed. Well, it's all for naught. Like, you know what I'm saying? Like, it's like it is about the right foundation. It's about the relationship that way. It's about your parenting style, but it's about a specific process to establish, right, the perception of dogs properly. See, that's the whole thing. You have to always default back to that. So if you're gonna have a conversation about, um, say, self-discovered, what does that even mean in lieu of what I'm saying? Right? Just think about that.
Reinforcing a self-discovered behavior, the dog will stop doing it just the same as if you stop reinforcing a taught behavior.
Now, this whole thing about stop doing or certain they say behaviors going away. Well, want to look. It's about a response. But if it's established the right way through what I'm talking about, through a proper process, there's the glue that holds it together. Okay, it's established because the perception of dogs have changed the right way. You're being perceived the right way. So I say, hey, pick up an object. Kaboom! It's going to happen, right? Because it takes a path of a demand. Okay, it doesn't mean at a certain point I'm not going to, again, the demand part is to be rewarding, but it's been set up as a demand. Okay, those core ingredients have been reconciled through the process itself in such a way that they're there now. Okay, the expectation, okay, is different. That's where talk about commands taking on different meaning. That's where at say day 12 of a 14-day board and train process, then you'll start to hear me speak verbal language. Not until that point. It's about what underpins those commands, okay? How they align in and through the relationship established through those core ingredients being reconciled at the beginning. Okay, so understand there's a sequence how these things all align. Okay, but if it doesn't happen that way, then what's underpinning anything, right? Well, the motors of the dog are sideways, right? Dog's expressing control. You're in bad. You're already done. Like there's no, you can talk through the stuff any way you want about have a discussion, but your problem is the fact the relationship isn't right. Okay, because it hasn't been established properly from the beginning by way of a proper process. There's the problem.
I kind of missed it. Do they agree with me or disagree?
I think it's just a
If
comment.
they agree, I don't have to, but if they disagree, I can pay attention to it. Oh, I see it here. Hold on. So let's go around the stronger than taught behavior if you stop. So anything with reinforcement is like that. That's just, that's what differential reinforcement is about too. Like you can, stop reinforcement here, start reinforcement here. You shift the motivation to do something else because
here's the same way you want to think about it as these trainers talk about this. Same as being a parent. Through the right parenting style, the authoritative parenting style, certain expectations are set up. Say, child cleaning up the room or picking up their toys. How's that? That's not the question. How's that established? So if you say something, the response is going to be correct, right? It's like, hey, certain expectations, but it's through the parenting style, right parenting style to begin with, from the beginning, right? Over time. Same type of thing here in terms of dogs as pack animals, in terms of how you're perceived in the relationship. through those core ingredients being reconciled properly, the expectations set up to respond a certain way, right? It's the same type of thing, really. But those are the things that aren't talked about here. Like they just jump into this whole thing about, you know, responses in a very superficial way here.
Of change of reinforcement, of course, of course. However, if that reinforcement that you used as differential reinforcement stops, that's when people kind of tend to believe that, oh, we use differential reinforcement, we stop reinforcing this one, now we're reinforcing that alternate or other or whatever behavior, and that is gone. This is not gone. This is just temporarily replaced because there is a reinforcement here. And the moment this kind of reinforcement here stops, the dog remembers that this is available, that this is still reinforcing. So there is even there to have differential reinforcement work, there is a very much more interesting and complicated process how to, make that work. But when you stop reinforcement, being shaping by approximation or being just saying, hey, Jude, come on the table, you stop the reinforcement on both, the behavior is going to start to fade away. That's very absolutely normal, unless we find a way to create self-rewarding, the activity of jumping on a table becomes self-rewarding.
They talk about self-rewarding, but understand it's always an issue about relationship, how you're perceived, control. Okay, you always have to cycle back. And so if a dog has a level of control, then by default, the fact that, right, the dog has gained control in the relationship, all sorts of things are going to be self-rewarding the wrong way. Okay. I mean, you have to understand this whole thing. You have to always walk this back to how you're perceived in the relationship. Okay. And so I talk about even the role of influence in terms of intercepting an expressed state of mind with a dog, its controls manifesting. I'm specific versus changing the dog's focus. Just all the confusion out there about what defines, training, how to get a certain result. It comes down to the right formula. Okay, period. So we're going to stop this part here. But you can see how this always brings confusion in because it's this whole thing about what holds it all together. What's the glue that holds it all together? What's the relationship glue that holds it all together? Well, it's the right process at the beginning to change how you're perceived in that relationship. And so again, I encourage you to watch the service dog training process in its entirety. And you'll see when I enter in, okay, to start to do certain things a certain way, and I talk through all of it, because that's the point. Is like you want to have a dog, especially if you talk about service dogs, are going to be consistent, reliable, dependable. You don't want to be out, which so many people are in a panic. They deep down they know the dog really deep down they know the dog can't perform, especially in a distracting area, because the dog's focus isn't right. And think of it this way: just like a selfish child doesn't have good focus. You can trust me. You can think whatever you want about yourself, even as a parent, but there's the reality of how your parenting style is perceived by the child. That's what it comes down to. And you can try to package up any way you want, but it's about outcomes. And that's what I talk about. So, again, thanks for watching. Again, if you want information, check out my website. I'm going to do a couple more parts here. Skip ahead, just to again fill in some gaps here, provide context, depth, but always defaulting back to what defines training. What's a process? What's the glue that holds all together? And when you hear these trainers even attaching certain words, such as the word behavior within this superficial idea of things by way of responses, it doesn't fit. Okay. They'll use certain words to try to gin it up or make things appear a certain way, but a lot of times it's just superficial response. And that's not even holding together anyway, because it's all about a proper process at the beginning. Thanks for watching.